So without any further ado, I want to introduce Winston Bonango from the Director of the Brooklyn City Planning Office.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Winston Bonango. I'm joined here by Eugenia Di Girolamo, who is the team leader in our office for Resilient Neighborhoods, which is a team that is actually specifically studying Southern Brooklyn neighborhoods and other neighborhoods in Brooklyn that were so severely affected by Superstorm Sandy. And we're very happy and proud to be here. Yes, Judy did twist my arm, and up until today, I actually wore it in an arm graft here from the pain. But you sent us some questions that we already looked into, and then Eugenia and I are happy to take your questions as well. We can start with that. We may not always have every answer for you, and we will probably not have the answers that you may want to hear, but we will try and do our best in giving you honest, straightforward answers as much as possible. So I'd like to suggest that maybe we start with the questions that you sent to us, and Eugenia and I will try and answer them for you. And if you have follow-up questions to the question, then please by all means raise your hand and let's have a good interactive session. Do you want to read them or no? Okay. So one of the first questions was, what is now mandated for construction or alteration in Manhattan Beach? And do you want to explain that?
Sure. So some of you may know that fall last year, the Department of City Planning passed the zoning text amendment, which was called the Flood Resiliency Zoning Text Amendment, and that tried to address rebuilding after Sandy. So the ways that we need to rebuild to be more resilient to future storms. That doesn't mean that the zoning was changed in any parts of the city, and especially it wasn't changed in Manhattan Beach. What's changed is that we complied with regulations that are FEMA regulations, so they're national standards that are already adopted by the state of New York, and they have been adopted as well by the city's building code, which is that new homes would have to be elevated above the base level elevation. As you probably know, Manhattan Beach is in a flood zone. That's something that is designated by FEMA, and that comes with a number. That number is your base level elevation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but what that means is that your home would have to be elevated a certain amount of feet above grade so that whenever the next storm comes, the water is allowed to flow in and out of the house, and it's not going to destroy the structure or anything that is in the structure below that elevation. A new home, correct.
Yes, new home, non-existing.
So what the text amendment did last year, we had it 2 feet on top of that base level elevation, and that's a national measure of safety to address the fact that we don't really know if the next storm is going to be as bad as Sandy or even worse than Sandy. So those 2 feet give us a little bit of room to play with to be a little safe. So all new homes throughout the city that are in the flood zone are going to have the lowest occupiable floor at that base flood elevation plus 2 feet, which is called the design flood elevation. And that's the only thing that has changed since Sandy.
Yes, sir.
Oh, was that above sea level or the ground level? Because my house is 9 feet above. We're at the by the ocean, and it goes down. So is it from 2 feet above sea level or ground level?
So the number that comes in the FEMA flood maps, it's measured from sea level, which usually it's lower than the grade of the street. And 2 feet is just to be added on top of that.
Oh,
on top of that.
Is that only for new homes or for renovations also?
That's an interesting question as well. So there's a threshold that the Department of Building uses. If the improvement so if the value of the home after the improvement is more than 50% of the value of the home before the improvement, then yes, that improved home would have to comply. Do you want me to explain?
Let's give an example. If the home was worth $100,000.
Yes, and after the improvement, the home is worth $150,000, $151,000, then yes, the new home would have to comply with all the building code standards. It's 2 feet on top of the base level elevation. So to give you an example, the flood zone in Manhattan Beach is about 4 to 5 feet above grade. So new homes would have to have their first floor elevated about 6 to 7 feet above grade. Those are the 2 feet that I'm talking about. Oh, grade is the street. Sorry, it's a technical term.
In Manhattan Beach, we have people who are renovating, but in essence, really creating new homes because their renovations usually surround the existing home, which magically falls in and no longer exists. So would these renovations be construed as new buildings or?
Again, if the value...
No, it has nothing to do with the flood damage. These are people who are renovating a home.
Yeah. But that would basically be qualified as a substantial improvement.
Yeah.
So yes, if you're in a flood zone and you're doing an improvement that it's above that 50% threshold in the value of the home, then yes, you have to comply.
Does this also imply that there should be no basement living?
Yes.
So these new homes that we were building in this area that now have below grade living spaces are not in compliance with city planning?
No.
So what do we do about that?
Can everybody hear the questions?
No.
No, okay, so let's repeat the question.
Okay.
So, go ahead, the question was, repeat the question and then.
I repeated, I can't remember.
It was about basement, uses of basements for residences,
Right.
for living, okay?
That it's not allowed by building code.
So what do we
New
do about
New
those?
residents.
New residents, so
Right.
if they existed previously, they can continue,
Yes.
but new residences are not.
Cannot have
permitted.
basements.
Not that they can't have basements, they cannot live in their basements.
It cannot be used for residential. It can be storage.
Can't rent it out.
Oh, then you can have basements.
Yeah.
Storage doesn't consist, is
No,
not
so the
considered-
only uses that are allowed under the base flood elevation are storage, parking, and building access. So
And
stairs,
if you put a couch down there or a television set,
that's not allowed.
it's not allowed. So where does the enforcement come in, which is my major question?
That enforcement is done by the Department of Buildings.
Department of Buildings.
Yes.
Well, that's a virtual department. Okay, thank you.
How about a ping pong table?
If you're putting in, if you're a homeowner and you're investing significantly in your home, and you live in a flood zone or your home is in a flood zone, I would think you would, if you're investing a significant amount of money, I think it behooves you, it would be in your interest, in your best interest, to make your home be able to sustain a future storm when and if it comes. Right, so whether or not the code requires it, what triggers it is determined obviously with the Department of Buildings, but certainly we encourage people, we encourage homeowners and builders to comply with the code because it saves property and it saves lives.
Isn't it kind of tragic that after all this time, now you're telling us this? After people spent fortunes rebuilding their houses and their basements and put it back up, and now we're finding out when we've already invested all of this money.
So did everybody hear the question? The question is, why are you now, only now finding out about this? Manhattan Beach, and Eugenia will add to this, Manhattan Beach has always been, since there have been flood maps in 1983, been in a flood zone. Homeowners here have always been subject to the requirements for new construction, for new homes, to comply with the flood maps. It just happens that these flood maps have since been updated and with new information. But this is not new. This is old. This has been around since 1983 and since Superstorm Sandy, right? That we did a special text change First there was an emergency order, and then there was a zoning text change that allowed compliance, better compliance with these rules.
And with the update of the maps, which just happened January of this year, more areas have been included in the flood zone, so maybe a couple of homes that before were not in the flood zone, but Manhattan Beach was most of it, if I remember correctly, most of it was covered, was in the flood zone.
Why are some homes going to be constructed all the higher than zoning allowed before Sandy? You want to take that one?
Yes. So
You didn't get that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. You want to?
yeah, I'll repeat it. Why are some homes going to be constructed or altered higher than zoning allowed before Sandy? It's a tricky question because it's what does zoning require and what does the building code requires and what does FEMA require, which is three different entities, but they all affect the way you build your homes. So zoning hasn't changed after Sandy. This is still an R31 zone, which means that building, the maximum height is 35 feet. That hasn't changed. The only thing, two things have changed. As I said, FEMA's put out new maps that after Sandy were updated, so they're more accurate to the risk that this community faces. So base flood elevation, which is the height where the water is expected to rise in the next storm, it's a little higher than it was in the original maps from 1983. Then on top of that, as we said, the Department of City Planning, to comply with requirements from the building code and the state building code and FEMA, added 2 feet of freeboard on top of that. So because of that, homes will seem to be a little higher, just because the standards and the baseline has changed slightly, or has increased slightly. But zoning overall, that hasn't changed in the neighborhood. That's something that base flood elevation plus freeboard, that design flood elevation, that's what we call it, that has changed across the board for all of the flood zones in the entire city of New York. Yeah.
As a chair, I'm putting my 2 cents in. One of the things that we have discovered is that people are asking for water standards and appeals special permit in Manhattan Beach. This has been going on since the 1998. As you know, I put that in. There's a big question. It's about that long, and you know I do these long questions. But the question that I have really is that the applicant for a special permit will tell everybody in the world, the community board zoning committee, and any of us who go to look at the plans, that the house is going to be 35 feet high, when in actuality, one of them that was passed at the community board and also passed at the Board of Standards and Appeals is going to be 47 feet high. But 47 feet high is from grade, and those of us who are lay people, I consider myself a layperson, I think a house is measured from the sidewalk. So the question, it begs the question for the special permit, where the Department of Building says it has to be built with certain parts of the house kept, 50% of the foundation, 50% of the first floor, 50% of the first floor walls. How do you raise a house keeping that, number one? How does it fit into the BSA, Board of Standards and Appeals regulations? And how does it not change the character of a neighborhood, which is really the essence of what the Board of Standards and Appeals is supposed to be looking at? So I've asked 3 questions in one, I think. It's on the bottom of the page. But I know there are people here who've asked me that, and I asked myself that. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Well, I can address part of that, and Winston can chime in. Homes will be slightly higher, yes, because the baseline has changed, and unfortunately, that's going to happen everywhere. Here in this neighborhood, it's 5 to 7 feet. That's the difference from the same zoning district that is outside of the flood zone, for example. The way we did it this way, we didn't want to change the zoning because currently what you're allowed to build on your lot, on your property, that's governed by zoning. Zoning tells you how much you can build on your lot, right? So when you have to elevate that, and sometimes you're going to lose a floor or half a floor, we didn't want people to lose floor area that we're allowed to build. So what we said with this text amendment is just that if you want to be flood resilient, and you want to just elevate your home, you're allowed to build what you were allowed to build before, just 5 feet or
At a
7
safe
feet.
level.
Yeah, exactly, at a safe level.
But they're not raising their homes, they're just making them higher.
Thank you.
They're
They're not doing that, they're just allowing themselves the extra 7 to 10 feet. But this, no, from where they were before, they have not changed any of their base elevations, they've just made the edifice higher.
the,
And they're
the rules
using
say,
this loophole.
so they cannot exceed the FAR that they're allowed to have. They cannot use the basement, or they may not use the basement for living purposes if it's a new building.
Not a new building, renovation.
For a renovation,
More than 50% in value.
I don't know the answer to that exact question, but the fact is that, yes, from the grade, from the street, if somebody is building a new home or elevating an existing home or adding to their home in compliance with the regulations, the buildings from the street will be taller because they're complying with the floodplain elevation plus the freeboard. So yes, buildings will be taller. There is no other way to do that. In terms of, your question was about the character of neighborhood finding that is part of the BSA special permit, and that is really, I have to direct it to the Board of Standards and Appeals for how they interpret neighborhood character, whether it is the character of the neighborhood before, as it was built, or the character of the neighborhood as it might be in the future under the existing zoning, taking into consideration what is the new flood elevation plus the freeboard.
I don't believe that we're exactly speaking about the same thing.
We recognize that sometimes there's a difference between what people have to do, be doing, and are doing. The fact, though, is that if they're not following the rules, they are subject to enforcement by the Department of Buildings, and they're also putting themselves at danger and their property in danger, because during a storm, such as Superstorm Sandy or even lesser storms, flooding can be expected on that level, right? And also if they can't claim it as part of their insurance because for insurance purposes, they need to have that space not habitable. Yes, ma'am?
Let's say you have a semi-detached house, so the houses are joined, and let's say the house next to me sells. How are they, when they renovate, how are they going to raise the house if they're attached to me on the other side?
I'm just going to repeat the question because I don't know if everyone heard. So she was just asking, what if I'm in a semi-attached home and the person next to me sells and they want to do something with the home and elevate it? How are they going to go about it? That's a very interesting question. If that's something that we're looking at with the Department of Buildings, it's a very hard situation that FEMA hasn't really considered up until now, because all of their work has been in southern parts of the U.S. where you have single-family homes. So we're just working with them and figuring out how that's done, how is it possible, if it's possible at all.
Okay, now the next question I have is,
The question is, can people simply pave over all of their yards? No. There is a zoning regulation that limits the amount of paving that can be done in a front yard. Don't know about the rear yards. So in the front yards, there's a limitation. It is approximately, I think, 50%. It's depending on the lot width, it varies between 20 and 30%.
okay, so what about all of these homes that are all concrete before your regulations?
Before that, they're so-called grandfathered in, right? So they can continue. By all means, encourage them to comply, but we can't, in zoning, make people comply, pass regulations and have everybody change. It happens very
Do
rarely.
they need to have permits to do that work? How long ago?
I'm sorry, what is the question?
Do they need to have permits when they concrete 2001?
2004, and nobody here complies.
So
And if you call the Department of Buildings,
They'll get around to it.
Yeah, so the tax amendment was actually 2008, and all homes built after April 2008 had to comply with this. So what Judy was asking is, what if a home was built after 2008, doesn't have the yard requirements, can they now, can DOT go?
And violate, yes.
Yeah,
They make them put it on.
Who enforces it?
Let's do the one question in the back. Yes, sir, that's you.
Some people look at.
Certainly, you know, this is one of those answers where you may not be happy with the answer, but it is the answer that it's an enforcement issue, and enforcement is done by the Department of Buildings. But of course, I mean, you all understand why. I think it's not, the original intent of the regulation was certainly to add in terms of aesthetics, but it was also to add to stormwater runoff, to reduce stormwater runoff. And to that extent, you should encourage your neighbors and explain to them, if you see them, that what happens. You know, but at the same, you know, you can do a better job than the Department of Buildings can in terms of explaining it.
Talk to your neighbors, don't worry.
All right, I think we had this gentleman, and then, as you know, the special permit is effective in certain community districts here in Brooklyn, and if you wish to change that, you should certainly approach your elected officials and the community board to request that that be
The
changed.
community board won't do it, they ignore it.
And that's because, but you have to discuss that with the community board and the elected officials. We process requests from the local communities, from the local officials, based upon whether we believe also that it's appropriate and whether there is a consensus to do so. If your local community board, if the majority of the community board believe that there should not be a change, then there isn't a vote there, a consensus there to make the change. For you, unfortunately for others who are supporting this, they obviously feel differently. But you're certainly welcome to go to the community board, go to your elected officials and ask for that. Yes, gentlemen, and then this woman in the back. Yes.
so the way coastal protection works, even though you're getting coastal protection where you can call a wall or it's a berm, that doesn't take you out of the flood zone. Most of the time, you still have to elevate your home. That's because what if the wall fails, then the homes behind that wall are going to be flooded again. So the way we like to deal with resiliency here is that we have multiple levels of protection. And a levee or a berm can be one, but then the single home still needs to be elevated.
And actually, Judy, I mean, all of your questions pertain to the special permit, and I think we've answered almost all of them. There's the 50% question that you asked. There's also about the special permits, the questions that this gentleman asked about the community board. Which one is it that you think that we haven't yet addressed?
It's a long question, and it's about notice. And it came rather recently, although it's been going on for a long time. I don't know if it's in the purview of city planning, but we think that it's everybody's business. When a notice comes out, and when I get to the president's report, I will tell you that there are 2 houses in Manhattan Beach that are coming up for special permits at the community board next week. The notice that the property owner gets says that the house is going to be, the person wants to enlarge the house, wants to take up some more of the property, wants to change the FAR, which most people don't know what that is, and if they want to speak to that issue, they can. And they go to they don't go to the community boards, they don't know what's being done. Nothing in the notice says where you can see the plans. The community board, on the other hand, the members of the zoning committee get a packet. It tells you it's pictures, it tells you anything, and you can get that at the community board. Teresa, I'll let you talk in a second, okay?
I just wanted to stop you. You can go right now to our website and get all the plans for the 2 Manhattan Beach items on the agenda.
Okay, that's good to know, because even I didn't know that. Nobody makes you aware of it when you see it in the notice. notice. And I'm not finding fault with anybody in particular, I'm just saying that this is a fact that people don't know. And I get, from our website, people write in and say, well, how can I find out about it? I said, go to the community board. And I can't give an opinion as to whether I think it's good or not. The question that we really had was, what's proper notice for a homeowner? Teresa, it doesn't say on anybody's notice that they can go to the website. It would be great if it did. So I think that would be something that we would like, perhaps city planning, to say to BSA that something's wrong with the notice, that the ordinary property owner doesn't get that information. Some of us who have been doing this for a long time know we can go into Teresa and she'll give us the plan, so that's a given. But most people don't know that, and I think, and we think, that people should be notified properly, not me if I'm not near that home, but anybody within that radius of people who are affected by it. We know now that the house is going to be raised. The last one, as I said before, was 47 feet. I don't know how much the one that is going to be passed soon at the Board of Standards and Appeals, who knows? 42, 43, 45, 50. Nobody knows that because it's hard to see, especially when the applicant says that it's 35 feet. And I think it's misleading, maybe since a lawyer did it, and I shouldn't talk, Marty, about lawyers, because I think it's a little disingenuous. Right? Marty is the lawyer who's my husband, so that's why I said that. So I don't think it has anything to do with what city planning does, but I would be curious to know what your reaction is to that as a layperson for me and as a professional for you.
Right, so there is no requirement of notice that we have from city planning. The Board of Standards and Appeals has requirements for notification, and certainly the community board is a repository and a required step in the process of receiving a special permit from the Board of Standards and Appeals. And I can certainly understand why an adjacent homeowner would certainly want to know about what is happening next to them, next to their property, or nearby across the street, and so on. And what I can only recommend is, in light of the regulations, is vigilance and paying attention to what is occurring around them and in their neighborhood, and quite frankly checking the community board's website and checking to see what applications are there. But there is no other requirement in law for notification. Yes, sir.
What is the purpose of notifying the board or whoever it is for the special?
Judy has, Ms. Barron has my email address, and be happy to follow up.
How about we do something with all the agencies together?
Oh, God. No, that's actually.
We should do it with all the agencies together. Department of Buildings, Board of Standards and Appeals, City Planning, anybody who wants to, any of those, DEP, okay.
Who else? All right, let's start with the addresses. Okay, we can pass those on to the Department of Buildings and ask them to look into them and give us a better answer and be able to get back to you, maybe even have them get back to you.